Yvonne said, it has not been going on because it's been on and on. So, I don't know.
Well, it takes a long time because what happens is it's cultural. And that means basically tradition. And so if the tradition is this is just something that we don't do, it takes a lot to change that tradition. You know, and it starts with our leadership. You know, we on? All right. Well, let's get to it. Good afternoon, good evening. I want to welcome you to, this is it. This is our final and last Bible study that we're going to do, not just for the year, but just period. Next year we'll relaunch and open up and do something different. I'll talk a little bit about that a little later on as we fellowship. But we got some good food, and we got, the Bible's always good. So, and we're talking about Christmas, so it can't get any better than that. So, let's open with prayer. Gracious and kind God, Lord, you are our God, our Master, our Father, our friend. We love you. We ask, God, that you be with us. You open our hearts, our minds, our eyes, Lord God, to explore your bounty and your goodness, Lord God, and that you would make yourself readily known and available to us, Lord God, and draw nigh to us through your word today as we break it open, Lord, so that we may be more like you when it's all said and done. In the name of Jesus we do pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so we're going to start or pick up at where we left off, talking about a Christmas story, except tonight, last week we covered the Gospel according to Matthew. Today we're going to pick up and talk about Luke's narrative. Just for those who don't know, there are two Christmas narratives in the biblical text. The first one we studied yesterday is Matthew. The second one is Luke. So I'm going to come back. I'm going to open up with a question for us to think about. Then we're going to do our little study. And then we will come back to the question. So here's the question. It's simply this. What does it take to bring Christ into the world? So allow me to write that up here so we can kind of keep that on our mind. Or better yet, let me change it up. What does it take to get the message or the story of Jesus out to the world? By out, we mean out to the world, communicated to other people, told, dictated, all of that good stuff. What does it take to get the message of Jesus out to the world? All right, so let's start with this. Matthew writes the first Christmas story. We talked about it last week. Luke's going to come back and he's going to write his version of it. And they are extraordinarily and extremely very different stories. I have to say that for integrity's sake. This ain't the same story, y'all. This is a case of two people telling the same thing two different ways. And we all know that. In fact, we often say there are two sides to every what? Story, right? We're going to see that lived out as truth today. Now, oftentimes when we talk about the Christmas story, we feel like we know it, right? What we typically think of when we typically say or retell the Christmas story, or we see it in the nativity sets, or we see it on Christmas plays, or even Christmas cards, it's typically a merger of the two stories. And tonight we'll really kind of play around with that, but we just want to tell the story tonight. All right, so let's start with Luke. The first thing that we will notice about Luke, I guess I'm going to kind of play on pulling out some of the differences between the two narratives tonight, all right? So the first thing that we notice in Luke's narrative, and we're not going to read it because it's extraordinarily long, is the first 4 verses. Those we probably will read. So let me read it from the Holman Christian Standard Bible, and it reads like this. Many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as the original eyewitnesses and servants of the world handed them down to us. It also seemed good to me, since I have carefully investigated everything from the very first, to write to you in an orderly sequence, most honorable Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things about which you have been instructed. This is the prologue to Luke's narrative, Luke's gospel. 1 second, please. Oh, I guess I don't have to sneeze. All right. So let's talk Luke's narrative. Now, what opens up Matthew's narrative? Who remembers from last week? How does Matthew start his Christmas story?
Generations.
With the generations, with the genealogy. Luke's got a genealogy, but it's certainly not at the beginning, is it? No, Luke's got some other kind of preamble going on. And if you scan down, there's not a genealogy. We don't get one before Jesus. We don't get one before he's born. We don't get one when he's born. We don't get a genealogy all the way up until the 3rd chapter. It's the last thing in the 3rd chapter. By the time Luke drops the genealogy on us, Jesus is a grown man, and he's already been baptized by John. All right? So we get that difference right there. That's one difference. So let's take a look at this genealogy really fast since we do have it. That's in Luke 3, starts at verse 23. All right? As he began his ministry, Jesus was about 30 years old and was thought to be the son of Joseph, son of Heli, son of Mathat, son of Levi, and on 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 and on. But what we'll notice is that there's a strong departure very quickly on between the genealogy that Matthew lays out and the genealogy that Luke lays out. They're two different genealogies. They start at the same place, Jesus. They work back, Matthew, and then they get different. I mean, not Matthew, Joseph, and then they get different. And they stay different. And they end different. Matthew traces it back to Abraham. He makes a case that Jesus is a strongly Jewish thing. Luke with a different orientation, Luke with a different perspective, a different reason for writing, writes and traces Jesus back to what?
Adam, God.
Straight back to God, doesn't it? Right? Son of Adam, son of God. Luke's reason for writing is not to tell us the Jewishness of Jesus, but to tell us that Jesus is one for everybody. Because and Adam was what? Was everybody. And Adam was from God, or son of God, the first son of God. And Luke's writing is telling us that Jesus is the true son of God and the new Adam. In him, God is doing a new thing. I almost hate to say that because that got to be so church abused in a few years ago. God's doing a new thing. God is doing a new thing. Well, it's true of Jesus. In him, Luke would argue he's the new Adam, and God is doing an extraordinarily, wonderfully new thing. There's another thing we'll notice in Luke's narrative. Luke is going to focus in on the unincluded. And the third thing we'll notice is his focus on the Holy Spirit. All right, we talked about the genealogy being later. We talked about a focus on God's title, or Christ's title as Son of God. And now let's take a look at this emphasis on Jesus Christ as Son of God. This is one of Luke's main things. At the announcement of Jesus, we see that in verse 35 of chapter 1. We're reminded that he is the what? Son of God. You see that? The Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy One will be born and will be called the Son of God. Luke wants us to know that. At his baptism in chapter 3, we just read that, verses 21 to 22, right before the genealogy, the dove flies over. This is my beloved Son of whom I'm well pleased, right? Again. And then the end of the genealogy, which we read, Son of God. So we have been hit with this triple play of Son of Gods, so that we know without a shadow of doubt Luke has a high, what we would call Christology. He believes that Jesus is in fact the what? Son of God. And he wants us to understand that and know that. And from the first 4 verses, he's telling you that he's writing to give an orderly account to Theophilus. We'll talk about Theophilus in literally half a second. So that Theophilus will know about the faith and what he's been instructed. So he really wants us to know that Jesus is the Son of God. All right, now, real fast, I threw out the word Theophilus. Let's take a look at that name. Theo, God. Philos, Philios, Philadelphia, the city of what?
Brotherly love.
Love.
That's where I was born.
Philos is friend, right? Theophilus would be friend of God, lover of God, beloved of God. Yes, ma'am.
Could you do that again, Pastor? What was the name, Theophilus?
Theophilus.
Yeah.
Theo is God.
Okay.
Philos is brotherly love or affection or friend.
Okay.
So it's literally beloved of God or friend of God. That's what Theophilus literally translates to. Now, a lot of people kicking around, was this somebody's actual real name, or is this code name for the Christian community in the church? I don't know. And it really doesn't change the story one way or the other. It could have been an actual Roman official. The way Luke begins his book is more in line with the secular world in which he lives. It's more of a history account than a religious theological account, right? If you read those first 4 verses, it doesn't sound like he's trying to make a statement of faith. He wants to tell us some historical fact. And the way that he writes this is that way. And then Luke also writes the first book of the church's history, the book of Acts. This is part 2 of this story, right? And that flows like a what? Historical piece. So Luke is trying to give us some history to it. Now remember, contextually speaking, Luke is the 3rd gospel written. Mark's the first one, then Matthew, now Luke. And Luke is writing because unlike Mark and less like Matthew, some time has passed now since Jesus has been on the scene with us. In fact, when you read Luke, Luke tells you, I'm writing down the stories I heard from the people who walked with Jesus. So Luke is at least the 2nd or maybe 3rd generation coming after the life of Christ. So a few things have happened now. They said, Jesus may not be coming tomorrow, but he might be coming tomorrow. But I've had time enough to research this, because according to Mark, and if you read some of Paul, they thought Jesus was coming. Did I miss him? Like that. So now that time has passed, he said, I've got time to stop and to think about this and to write some research, and now I want to give you an orderly account. So that difference has now begun to produce some different ways of thinking about God and our obligation to God. All right, so let's point out we'll skip that. Back to the genealogy really fast here, and Luke's purpose of writing. We can't really talk, and you can't understand the New Testament without understanding the backdrop and context of Roman imperial theology and Roman imperialism. Much like it's hard to talk about anything in our world today without talking about America and American colonialism, especially if you're on the western side of the world, right? There's a reason so many people speak English, right? So it's hard to understand it without that. Here's the context of it. Luke's trying to tell his audience that there is a Son of God and there is a real Son of God, and his name is not Julius Caesar, but it's Jesus Christ. I should have brought down some pictures for you all, but you can go home and Google these things and it's going to blow your mind. Type in Son of God, Julius Caesar, and click images, and start to see the statues and the plaques and things that were erected to Caesar and that Caesar commissioned. That was his official title. Lord of Lords, King of Kings, Son of God. So as Luke and the other Christian writers began to write, they're writing with the explicit purpose to tell the world, no to Caesar, yes to Jesus, right? And that's how we have to see this story, because he writes it in a way in which he is countering all of the components of imperial theology, all of the components of the birth narratives of Julius Caesar, and saying, no, this happened over here with this guy. He's not a big deal. This guy's a big deal. And when you read the whole gospel in light of that reality, Jesus dies by whose hands?
Man.
Man, but specific what kind of man? Not really. They handed him over to some even badder folks.
Yeah.
Greek.
Not the Greeks. They had been beat up already. The
Romans.
Romans.
That's right, Romans.
And he dies by crucifixion on a Roman cross.
Yeah.
Right? With insignia over him. At the top of that list of other languages is a Roman statement.
You talking about that abbreviation above
Yeah.
the cross? Okay.
Yeah. So this is a Roman thing. It's a Roman state thing. And the resurrection in that light is God's reversal of saying, y'all don't have final say. You're not the end all be all. I am. Right? And when you read through the Old Testament prophets of Daniel, and Daniel's visions are condemning world powers. And you go back to the New Testament and you read through Revelations, and the beasts that are seen in that revelation are symbolic of world powers that try to dominate. And at the end, we see that power doesn't belong to any of those, neither in Daniel, neither in Revelations. It is always with God and with whom God says it is. Right? So that's another piece of this. Jesus as true Son of God, not Julius Caesar, but Jesus Christ. All right? Now, another difference between the two Gospels. Where is Jesus born at?
Bethlehem.
Both agree. Where did Jesus grow up? Difference, doesn't it? Remember last week, they had the baby in Bethlehem, right?
Yeah.
Then what happens?
Go to Egypt.
They stay there for a little while.
And then they had to move.
Then they move because what happens?
Pharaoh's army.
Herod.
Close to Pharaoh, but Herod.
Herod.
And where do they go?
Egypt.
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 And they stay there for a while. And then what happens?
They move again.
They move back. And they want to go to Bethlehem, but they end up in Nazareth. Right? That's Matthew's story. What about Luke's? Where are they when this story starts? Where the angel comes to Mary where? Try verse 26.
126.
126.
Who?
Luke 126.
Galilee,
City of Galilee.
Nazareth. They're in Nazareth from the get-go, right? Now the only reason that they moved to Bethlehem is because of the census. So they moved to Bethlehem and while in Bethlehem they have the baby, and then they go back home, right, after the census to Nazareth. So that's another difference in the two narratives is where they originate from and where they return to initially. And in Luke's account, there's no slaughter of the innocents. There's no flight into Egypt. There's just a census. Now what's interesting is, in both stories where they're similar is, there's a ruling power exerting force and domination and moving people's bodies. In Matthew, it results in the termination of life, right? But in Luke, it's a little milder, but man, that's still some gumption to tell people, hey, go over here so we can count you. We still see an abuse of what? Abuse of power, abuse of those domination systems, and God is never pleased with those things. All right?
Now, as far as compare that to Matthew, they weren't in Nazareth when the angel come.
Different hometowns altogether. In fact, if you go back and take a look at it.
What chapter we going back to see?
Matthew 1.
What are we looking for?
The angel. That's verse 18.
Yeah, read that.
Okay. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise, when as his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with the child of the Holy Ghost.
No, you know what, you go down to chapter 2 and start at verse 22.
Chapter 2, 22.
Uh-huh.
Okay. 2:22. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go thither. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene.
Right. So what we have is Jesus is born in Matthew again, also in Bethlehem, but he's born there because that's where they started off at.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
And if you go back to the end of chapter 1, verse
Immigrant.
24, at the very end, it says, she gave birth to a son, and he named him Jesus. Going to chapter 2, and Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. So that's where he was born in Matthew, right? And then the wise men come, they're still in Bethlehem, and then Herod orders for everybody 2 and under to be what? Killed. So they were in there, they were in Bethlehem for some years. And then they fled and went to Egypt for a while. And then on their way back, there was fear, so instead of going back to Bethlehem, they went to where? To Nazareth, right? So they get the same locations, but for different reasons, right? All right. Another interesting difference, and this one kind of jumps out in Matthew. Who gets the visions, and who do the angels talk to?
The wrong people.
The rock.
The wrong people.
No. Well, I guess you might say that. Who's the star in Matthew's story?
Elizabeth.
No. Elizabeth's not mentioned.
Mary?
No.
No.
You don't get to say nothing either.
Talks to Harry.
No, the Magi talked to Herod.
Joseph?
Joseph.
Okay.
All the action comes to who? Joseph. And Joseph, being a righteous man, decided to what? Put her away quietly. And an angel came to Joseph in a dream. And the angel told Joseph to name the baby Jesus. In Luke's story, who gets all the angelic visitation?
Mary?
Mary. We get that wonderful, wonderful piece of literature. We're going to eat like dogs today. The Magnificat, right? It's Mary who gets all of the heavenly divine interaction. It's Mary who is the recipient of all of that kind of discussion. All right. One more difference, and then I'm done. We'll go back to the little question that I have hanging up here. There's another big name mentioned in Luke's account that gets no press in the birth narrative of Matthew. Really big deal in Luke's account. Whole first chapter is kind of about him. Most of the first chapter, at least.
About Jesus.
No, Jesus is the star of both of them. Who?
Aaron.
Zacharias?
You're getting closer with Zechariah, but he's only in the story to introduce us to another character. Who's the real big deal of that story?
Abraham.
You're getting colder with Mary.
Elizabeth.
John the Baptist?
Getting close. John the Baptist. John's a big deal in Luke, isn't he? How do you know he's a big deal? It follows the biblical archetype of, we talked about archetypes last week. Tell me who this is. Older woman, barren, can't have children.
Elizabeth.
The Lord intervenes. Sarah. And a host of other women, isn't it, right? Samson, right? So a miraculous intervention to somebody who otherwise could not have lived. Sunshine Anderson. Heard it all before. We've heard that before. We've seen that before. And we know that when that happens, the kid is typically what? A big deal, right? So Luke lets us know that John's a big deal, but how he frames it, and you got to know backdrop again. There's a community called the Essenes. Some people attribute and say that John was the head of that community in early first century Palestine. It's inconclusive with scholarship, but what we do know is that John the Baptist was a really big deal. Luke says John and Jesus are cousins, right? Right? That's what we get in the text, right? That's Luke saying that John was important, but not as important as Jesus. Because in history, historically speaking, at the time Luke's writing this, John still had followers. And we see glimpses of this in the Gospels, because the writers tell us John's disciples came to see who? Jesus, sometime later, right? And John been off the scene. He's already been beheaded and everything. So John the Baptist was a really big deal. And he makes mention of it in Luke's, and he's mentioned in Luke's gospel in the infancy narrative, not so much in Matthew's, all right? So that's another difference between the two of them. The way that Luke writes them in, John the Baptist is seen as the end of the Old Testament. Jesus is seen as the beginning of the New Testament. Here's how he does that, really smooth. We talked about the archetypical birth of John the Baptist, right? Heard it all before, older woman, miraculous intervention by God, special baby. So he's saying John's important. But at the time he's writing it, some people are still following John and not following Jesus. So he's trying to tell them he ain't the one. You need to switch tracks, follow Jesus. He does that by how Jesus is born. Is he born in a way that's ever happened before?
No.
No, not even in the ancient world. Now think about it. Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Egyptian mythology, it's nothing new for gods to impregnate women. In fact, you go back to Genesis mythology, God destroys the world because the giants were laying with what? Earthly women. So there's nothing new for some supernatural being to copulate with the woman. But it's normally just that, copulation. There's no record in the Gospels of that being the case with the birth of Jesus Christ. Look how Luke writes it. The Holy Spirit shall what? Tip in your room, seduce you, lay you down. None of that. The Holy Spirit will what? Overpower you and you will conceive. It's a God thing. God does it. It's a new thing in a new way. So what Luke is telling us through this way, through this story, is that John was great. In fact, Jesus will come back and say he's the greatest of all the prophets. But Jesus is a whole other league of his what? Of his own.
By himself.
Yeah, league by himself. All right, so those are the main differences between the two. Now, I'm coming back to my original question, and I'm done. What does it take to get the message of Jesus out? Luke does it in his own way. If anything I've been saying all this time is simply that. He does it quite differently than what's been out there before. Mark writes, he ain't even think to write about how Jesus was born. Matthew, a little bit later on, says, y'all need to know how he got here. Luke says, yeah, that's good, but Frank Sinatra style, I want to do it my way. He does it his own way. So what does it take to get the message of God out, the message of Christ to the world? It might take some unconventional packaging. That's what Luke does. First 4 verses tell us he's not writing a gospel like anyone who's ever written it before him. Why? What makes it so different? He's doing it his own way. He's going to use everything around him to point towards Christ. That's interesting, isn't it? But that's precisely what we see him doing. He uses the surrounding culture, be it outside literature, that historiographs that were about other famous people. He borrows the language from that. Now, this is interesting, though. Watch this. Nowadays, don't we in church get all frowned up if somebody bring what we deem to be outside, anything, language, music, dance, anything, into the church.
Anything
They
different?
come in here with all that old secular stuff. Right? These are people who have never read the Bible because it's full of outside stuff. We just got through walking through the book of Philippians. It wouldn't even be no letter if Paul wasn't born from outside thoughts. Here's the point. What does it take to get Jesus to the world? Use whatever's in your grasp. Parents, your child's acting up. What do?
Whoop 'em.
Feed them, Pastor.
Probably should have taken this.
Old school.
Feed them.
Old school says, you what?
Spare the rod,
Spank 'em.
child.
Now, if you were like my grandma, Ruby Harris, anything in reach
That's it. Yep.
could be used to get the job done.
That's my mama.
It could be a belt,
Broom, mop,
a broom, a shoe,
mop.
with a brick, y'all know, spatula, you name it. Extension cord, switch, table, didn't matter. Whatever was around that could get the job done. Same thought here with getting the gospel out. Whatever that's around to get the what? To get the job done. What's it take? Might got to use some unusual packaging. I have to use whatever's around. What else does it take to get the gospel out? Luke lets us know you got to use your own voice. You got to use your own voice. Luke lets us know there have been people who have told this story before me, but I got to tell it my way because I need you to know it, and I need you to have an understanding. There will always be somebody before us who has transversed and shared the gospel wherever we may go to share it. But that person isn't you. You have a unique way of seeing the world. You have a unique voice. You have unique insight. You have unique experiences. And you've got to use all of that to get the message of Christ out to the world. Now, I know y'all got some questions over there. I'm talking and everything.
Yeah.
So ask me the question.
Okay,
Don't be down there,
get
she's down
ready.
there. Come on.
Okay, I said, I never knew who John the Baptist's parents were.
Okay.
And so, I said it was Elizabeth and Zachariah because Mary and Elizabeth were cousins, and when they met, he leaped in her stomach. Bam, told you.
Well, that's there in the text. Zachariah,
That's what
John's daddy's a priest. Elizabeth, housewife. And yes, Mary, a little not knowing what to do with this news from the angel, says, let me go holler at Elizabeth. Because the angel tells her, hey, look, you're not by yourself. Elizabeth, ain't that your people? She's with child too. There's a whole lot of little stories in here. I was just trying to be brief with it. Couple things we can jump out there. God don't ever leave us on an island. Then two, she goes, remember Elizabeth is older, but Mary's younger, right? There's all this talk of age gap and age differentialism. Yo, it's just life. You're going to have more of some things and less of some things, but it's just life. Elizabeth had more years, more access, more money. Husband being a priest, they had some ducats, some dineros, some money. Mary ain't had that. But life hit them all the same. They both had the same experiences, just from different perspectives. Age is important, but it's an interesting construct that means sometimes very little. Because we just live in life. You either have more experience or what? Less experience. Mary, being wise, goes to seek one who's had what? More experiences. But they're both trying their best to circumnavigate around this thing called life and what they dealt with. And they both deal with it. And they handle it, here's the take home, together. Isn't that interesting? A lot of wonderful little things in these narratives. Any other questions? I'm out of here. I'm going to eat. That's it? Fantastic. All right. Well, Thank you all for coming. We're going to eat and just fellowship for the rest of this time, and that's going to be good. One last thing. This is the last Bible study. Zip. It's a wrap. She's like, Sister Pauline's like, are you serious? I'm like, yes. Serious?
Year?
Huh?
For the year?
Ever. Ever. I don't like it. I want to kill it.
Stop playing.
I'm saying in lieu of Bible study. I'm not even completely sure of the format myself yet, but it's going to be different. We're going to call it Believers Night Out. That's what it is. Believers Night Out. So the format of it, all I can tell you, is going to be informative, inspirational, and innovative. That's what I can tell you. The format of that, entirely I don't know. I think there'll be a small worship component. I think there'll be some instructional piece. Then we're going to break out into groups. I'm going to be looking to find people who can host a group for a group discussion. And we're going to do it that way. So it won't be Bible study as usual, of me standing here lecturing for an hour. It's going to be something different. It's going to be the Believers Night Out. So we're going to try that in the spring. I think that this model will be more effective. And I want to stick with that. We want to do it that way. So for people who brains hear and receive and think differently, there will be Bible study. It will be called something else. And it will be done differently. Okay? So I know some. I've been doing this too long.
Trying to get some
He don't got rid of Bible study.
Trying to get some unity going on.
Next thing we know, we're going to be out. No.
No, just trying to get some unity in the
It's
church.
being repackaged. It's a different format, right? It's going to be more interactive. Yeah, well, it's going to be more interactive. It's going to be just those things. We're going all in. It's going to be informative, inspirational, innovative, and interactive. So, for instance, tonight's lesson probably was about 20-25 minutes. Under the new format, we would we might take this question. We would be broken off into groups. Then you would go with your group and kick that around with what we talked about tonight. That gives everybody a chance to talk and to share. Some of us don't like to talk in big groups. Some of us may have questions that we don't want to raise in front of everybody because we might feel some kind of way, And like you said, sis, I didn't know who John the Baptist's parents were. I never heard of his parents. That's fine. And you may not want to, especially she got a camera going. We don't know how many people are going to watch this before it's all said and done. It might be 5 people watching now. Tomorrow, another 5 may watch it. By next Wednesday, it might have 1,000 views. You may not want to put yourself out there like that. I didn't know who his parents were. But in a small group, in another room, in another setting, you can raise whatever questions you want to raise. Right? So that's what we're trying to do. We want to touch everybody. We want to break it down and make it more fun. The Bible studies that folks have liked, where I've been able to talk until 8 o'clock and nobody knew it was time to go, were the ones where we broke into groups. Right? So that's what we're going to do. It's not that we're getting rid of Bible studies, Sister Paula. Sister Paula said, no. Deacon Hale said, they're like, Jesus, no. I can get phone calls. Come here.
Will it still be alive and stay?
Oh, gotcha. I'm going to teach for 15 to 20 minutes. And then we go. You said then we can go? I imagine some people probably will go. But then we're going to break down into the groups and have discussion groups. I'm going to formulate probably discussion questions and the like. Or it can just be a time for reflection. What did you learn? What did you learn? How do you see it? You know what? I heard what he said, but I was thinking about it this way. And we can do all of that in the group and the whole 9 yards. All right? So it's just a different way of doing it. It's the way I wanted to do it in the first place. We're going to do it that way.
Started out that way.
Huh?
We did have some groups and we was in competition with the guys.
Yeah.
We had games on the screen.
It's going to be like that times some more.
Okay, well that's fine.
Yeah, we're going. So I need a minute to try to figure out what we're going to teach, how we're going to teach it, and set it up for the year. Plus, we need to get past all the bad weather, the inclement weather, snow, not snow, ice, no ice.
Snow every day. in
Well, you know,
Detroit.
everybody ain't from Detroit.
Well, yeah, all right. Keep it sliding, player. Keep it sliding.
So it's just, and to retool. And then we're gonna hit it and hit it hard and hit it loud. Plus, whatever group leaders that we have, I wanna train them so that they can facilitate discussions, right? Little basics. Reverend Barnett will probably have a group, or Deacon Hill may have a group, or First Lady may have a group. I gotta teach them how to take the floor back. You know, if somebody's talking for a long time, how to take it back. How to ask probing questions. For instance, Sister Cowan, based on your walk with God, what are some insights and things that you may have to share about God that no one else could?
It's deep, I got to think about it.
That's fine. That's what we want you to do.
Well, what I've learned this month, I've had some trials and tribulations, but I learned to be grateful. The
Where'd
word
they get
was
out of
shot
my
out
shot?
of me at the bottom. Just to be grateful for what you got, who you are, where you at, because this is where you're supposed to be.
All right.
That's deep.
You know, all is well.
That's it.
That's just what it is.
That's deep.
Yeah, I told you it was deep.
Stop whining, stop crying, and just be grateful, because a lot of people like to be in your shoes.
That is true. That is true. There's so many things that we don't even think about that we take for granted, like just walking,
That's right.
having feet.
That ain't funny though.
I mean, no, I'm serious. I mean, you know, there's some people who, you know, who wish that they could, or wish that they could walk. You know, I used to belong at a church, and the brother that was leading worship didn't have but one arm, and he would get up and say, "Come on, put your hands together if you can."
That ain't funny.
He wasn't trying to be funny, but it rung out to me all the time. The things that we take for granted. You know, we be sitting in church
Put your
right
hands
now,
together, you ain't got but one. That ain't funny, Lord, forgive me.
sitting on our hands, and he wish he could clap his hands. You know, he with that nerve on him, you know.
All right now.
So,
Thank God for that, man.
Who he talking about? Our ranking?
Look, I don't know this
no,
comedy
Sister
swear. I
Baba,
gotta get
you
my
can't
man.
call people names.